Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me today for this episode of Momentum. Let's build momentum to end race based hatred and violence. My name is Tracy Brown, and I am the founder and the moderator for the public Facebook group, What Is Mine to Do, where we ask that question of ourselves and each other every day: what is mine to do to interrupt race based hatred and violence? And this momentum series is all about building momentum for the individual things, the things that I can do as an individual, the multiple things that I can do as an individual to demonstrate my commitment to interrupting and ending race based hatred and violence. And we do a lot of focus in the group on awareness and education so that we each have information to use when we're in conversations, or that we are continuing our own education and learning so that we have examples to share when we are showing up in our communities as individuals committed to ending racism. And today I want to talk about an intersection, because we know intersectionality is a real thing. And in the What Is Mine to Do group, we do focus on the impact of race-based hatred and violence and racism. So we focus on race, and anything we do, we are making that connection. But today, March 31st, is also the International Transgender Day of Visibility. And now, at the end of March, and then also in November with the Transgender Day of Remembrance, it really makes sense to talk about the transgender community, the transgender population, and how with intersectionality, the distinction that happens for people of color who are also transgender. So, if you're not aware of the Transgender Day of Remembrance, it is every March 31st, and it's an opportunity to both honor and uplift transgender individuals, and also to bring a little bit of awareness to the challenges that people who are part of this demographic face. But primarily, it really is to honor and celebrate the contributions, especially when you think about contributing on top of dealing with all kinds of discrimination or inappropriate treatment. So with the Momentum series, we try to keep it really, really short, and I'm going to do that today. So this is not the full webinar on this topic. This is simply, I want to highlight a couple of things. I do want to talk a little bit about the demographics, the racial demographics within the transgender population in the United States. And then I want to just do that part of honoring and celebrating by highlighting, I don't know, 6, 7, maybe more people who are transgender and contributions that they have made. And so let's do that. So I was interested because I really had no idea a few years ago, but I got really interested, and I realized that almost everyone I was seeing being featured who identified as transgender, that almost everyone was white. And there were a few exceptions, like especially if they were actors or actresses and they were, or celebrities, then I would see one or two or very few people of color. And I was like, you know what? With the Transgender Day of Remembrance, the overwhelming majority of people who have been killed by violence are people of color. And so it just made me go look up demographics in general. So from the U.S. Transgender Survey, and I looked up 3 or 4 different surveys and studies, and the numbers were real similar. They weren't always exactly the same, and so I'm using the numbers from the U.S. Transgender Survey, and it reports that from the research that the transgender population is 55% white, about 15 to 16% Black or African American, Latinx or Hispanic is about 21%, Asian about 5%, Indigenous and Native American about 3%, and then people who identified as multiracial was a little less than 7%, like 6 to 7%. And this is really fascinating to me because if we want to end race based hatred and violence, right, then we have to recognize that it does require us to pay attention to the way that people are treated based on ethnic and racial identity. And I was actually shocked to find that in the US, the Transgender Survey and others reported that the population of people who are transgender who are white or who identify as white was only 55%. Because, as I said, from so many of the things that I would see in the media or people who would be highlighted, I was seeing more like 95% white. So, that is one thing that we want to think about in terms of our own sharing and our own um, highlighting of people in the different places that we show up. So it is the Transgender Day of Visibility. So let's give some visibility to people past and present from different racial and ethnic categories. I almost always want to start with Marsha P. Johnson. And Marsha P. Johnson was a key figure in the Stonewall Uprising. And also, she co founded a group called STAR, an acronym for Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. And when people talk about the impact or the focus on gay rights and on the LGBTQ, the LGBTQ plus population beginning to really have a lot of visibility in the world, this Black woman, this Black trans woman, Marsha Johnson, should always be the first name that we call out. Another name that is a current name under the category of activists and advocates, I would include, or I'm just going to pick from the long list, Janet Mock, who is currently alive, and not from the perspective of political activists and civil rights, but from the perspective of advancing the narrative about people who are transgender through the arts, as a writer, as a director. And then a name that I wasn't aware of until recently is Miss Major Griffin Gracie. And she has been a leader in transgender rights, focusing on trans women of color who are incarcerated. And she is on my list of people to learn something more about. In politics and law, Cece McDonald is a name that you might be familiar with. She's been an advocate for trans justice, and that came after an experience that resulted in being attacked and then wrongful incarceration. Another name to think about is Bambi Salcedo. And Bambi founded the Trans Latin Coalition, and is a person who has done a lot to advocate for trans Latinx people. Billy Tipton, a jazz musician from the 40s, 50s, 60s, Billy Tipton lived as a transgender man in a time of where there was no acceptance and was not known. It was not known that Billy Tipton was transgender all the time that he was performing and that he was, being hired by lots of folks for his amazing talent as a musician. And another name that I'm going to highlight today is actually not in the US, but I'm fascinated by Georgina Byers' story. And she was the first openly transgender member of the parliament in New Zealand. So these are just a few names for you. If any of them are names that you don't know, yeah, I do need to add two more. One, Sarah McBride, who was the first openly transgender state senator in U.S. history, and Victoria Kolakowski, who is the first openly transgender judge in the U.S. So we have so many examples of people who identify as transgender who have excelled in every possible field. And the Transgender Day of Visibility gives us the opportunity to recognize them, to honor them, and to recommit to being respectful and to recommit to creating environments that are inclusive for all of us. And finally, because this is momentum and it is part of the What Is Mine to Do Facebook group, I want you to also recommit to pay attention to racial hatred and violence in general, and specifically with people who are transgender. My name is Tracy Brown. I am so, so glad that you joined me for this episode of Momentum, and I'll see you again next Monday.